A woman's strength begins where her habit of being convenient ends, when she no longer adapts to others' moods or dims her light to avoid bothering anyone. This decision is rarely easy. It brings fear that love will disappear without convenience. Yet it is, in reality, a first step toward true freedom. Breaking free from the role of a savior means refusing to carry others' lives on one's shoulders, not reliving stories that always end the same, and ceasing to help those who don't want to change their reality. This isn't cruelty, it's maturity. Help, when it becomes a habit, stops being kindness and becomes dependency. Emotional enslavement starts with the belief that one must be good, calm, gentle, and understanding, even when it hurts, even when ignored, used, or betrayed. But a woman who chooses strength stops groveling. She doesn't plead or persuade. Her voice sounds different, firm but not loud. Most importantly, she rearranges her priorities, not around relationships or others' comfort, but around herself, her growth, her depth. Because when a woman lives at the center of her life, everything unnecessary falls away, and everything authentic is drawn to her. A woman who embraces strength stops explaining herself, not because she has nothing to say, but because she no longer needs someone else's understanding to be herself. This decision is painful, but liberating, as it cuts the last thread of dependency on others' approval. To stop explaining is to stop justifying her pain, her decisions, her changes. It's freedom that others don't immediately understand. But a woman who lives from her depths no longer bargains for acceptance. She doesn't explain why she's uninterested, why she doesn't respond, why she no longer goes where she is ignored. The power of silence. It's not resentment. It's a sign of maturity. Because those who want to understand will, even without words. And those who are used to demanding accountability won't hear even the most sincere explanations. A woman who chooses herself knows that silence is also a language of self-respect. This decision changes the boundaries of communication. She no longer continues conversations where she is devalued, nor returns to dialogues where she is forced to justify herself. Because a woman who stops explaining no longer fights for what should be natural respect. Women's strength begins where the clinging ends, to people, situations, or ideas that are already no longer alive. This isn't about indifference. It's about maturity that no longer confuses love with attachment. A woman who stops holding on chooses not to grasp. Letting go, stepping away from the fear of loss, is a painful but honest path. Because behind the fear of losing is almost always the fear of being without meaning. A woman who decides not to cling faces this fear head-on and suddenly discovers that everything truly meant for her doesn't leave, and everything that disappears was already lost. She just didn't want to admit it. Internal permission is not weakness. It's the highest form of strength. It's when you let the world be as it is, without trying to hold on to what's leaving, not freezing in the past, not building illusions. A woman who lets go doesn't lose. She frees up space, and into this space comes the new. Not because she asked for it, but because she's ready. For the one who stopped clinging no longer creates tension, and then life begins to flow differently, more calmly, more purely, more deeply. A woman's strength blooms when she stops living by others' scripts, when she stops asking what is right and begins to ask what is true. The decision to listen to themselves is not about selfishness. It's about honesty, trust, and intuition. This isn't mysticism. It's that internal silence where the true voice speaks. A woman who chooses herself stops seeking external validation. She doesn't need advice at every step because she starts to feel if she's calm inside, then it's right. The strength of the internal no is the foundation of freedom. A woman who learns to say no where she once endured, for the first time experiences the taste of true agreement, because her yes is no longer from fear, from duty, but from a deep agreement with herself. Only by stepping out of the world of others' expectations is a return home. A woman no longer tries to be convenient, beautiful, or understandable. She simply exists in her own tempo, in her own desires, in her truth. And it is this that makes her genuinely attractive, because she doesn't live to please. She lives to be herself. Women's strength begins to grow when she stops being convenient, when she's tired of smiling out of politeness, agreeing out of fear, and pretending everything is fine just not to upset anyone. This decision might seem abrupt, but in reality, it is a return to oneself. For too long, women have lived in a world where being good is almost an obligation. Don't offend, don't argue, don't fall out of line. Hold your feelings, do as asked, and maybe you'll be loved. But that's not love, it's training. A woman who chooses herself begins to shed these masks. And the first thing she notices is discomfort. She becomes inconvenient for those who were used to using her kindness, for those who knew she always adapted, for those who considered her silence as agreement. But with this inconvenience comes not loneliness, but freedom. Only the habit of bending doesn't leave immediately. It's ingrained in the skin, in speech, in movement. A woman choosing freedom learns to stand straight, not in aggression, but in dignity. She looks at the world differently, as a person who has the right to their feelings, their desires, their no. And this no sometimes sounds for the first time. It may be fragile, shaky, but there's more strength in it than in 1,000 yeses said out of fear. A woman who decides to stop being convenient doesn't become hard. She becomes authentic. And this authenticity is her strongest protection. There are women who know how to be with others, but don't know how to be with themselves, who comfort, care, save everyone but themselves. And in this forgetting of oneself lies the root of exhaustion, hurt, and inner emptiness. Strength begins with a different decision: to be with oneself, not betraying oneself for others, like refusing to seek support outside. This is a step into silence. When it becomes clear, no one will come and make you whole. No one will heal the pain you've stored under a smile for years. A woman who decides to be with herself stops seeking salvation in love, in recognition, in others' arms, because she feels for the first time that support is already there. It's her. The process of becoming an internal home is gentle and prolonged. A woman stops berating herself, blaming, shaming. She starts being kind, not only to others but also to herself. She asks, "What about me? What do I need now? What am I tired of enduring?" And in this attention to herself, the most important thing is born: trust. Stability doesn't come immediately. First anxiety, then silence, and then suddenly peace comes. Without explanations, without guarantees, just feelings. I am with myself. I don't run, don't betray, don't leave. A woman who chooses to be herself doesn't become lonely. She becomes fulfilled. And then the question of who will fill the void doesn't arise, because there is no more void. There is internal support on which she stands firmly. There is something exhausting about trying to prove you're worthy of love, trying to be better, softer, more beautiful, justifying someone's roughness not to seem difficult, explaining your no, not to be rejected. A woman who chooses strength once decides to stop proving anything. It all starts with awareness. If you have to convince someone of your worth, you've already lost. because true connection doesn't require effort to be seen. Those who can truly love see you right away and don't ask you to be a convenient version of yourself. The decision to stop proving is liberation from the eternal need to be understood, from the endless drive to earn. A woman stops justifying her feelings, desires, boundaries. She no longer argues with those who don't hear her because she knows true value isn't proven. It's felt. This knowledge, I am enough, doesn't shout. It's quiet, calm, but in it lies immense strength. A woman stops imposing herself, running, explaining. If she isn't chosen, she doesn't impose herself. If she isn't heard, she doesn't shout. Only then does she become someone whose silence speaks louder than words. Not out of resentment, but because she's tired of fighting for a place in someone else's life. In this silence lies maturity, because her life no longer depends on external recognition. Sometimes a woman can live her whole life not feeling her body, ashamed of it, scolding, punishing it with hunger or exhausting diets, comparing it with others, hiding it, ignoring signals of fatigue, all in an attempt to be proper, worthy, acceptable. But strength starts with a different decision: to return to the body. The body isn't an enemy, it's a home, a place where every emotion lives, every memory. A woman who chooses herself learns to feel not just pain, but also pleasure, not just tension, but also relaxation. She stops living from the mind, starts listening to where she's stiffened, where she's chilled, where she wants warmth. Acceptance of one's nature isn't about ideal shapes. It's about acknowledging, I have the right to be, with all my curves, with tired hands, with crow's feet. A woman stops fitting into standards because she feels herself from within. And there, life, connection with the body, returns strength, because in it lies intuition. Wisdom lives there, knowing when to go, when to stop, when to lie down, and just breathe. A woman who returns to her body no longer allows others to cross her boundaries, because she feels these boundaries with her skin. Through this connection with self, healing comes. Not from books, not from advice, but from the body. A woman starts to dance, to touch herself with respect, to look in the mirror without revulsion. And in this acceptance, a radiance is born that no cosmetic can match, because it shines from within. Waiting is an imperceptible form of self-betrayal. It starts small, waiting for someone to write, to call, to remember. Then it expands subtly, waiting for changes, waiting for recognition, waiting for someone to understand without words. And suddenly you realize, life isn't passing in actions, but in constant tension, as if the heart is crouched in a corner, afraid to move. A strong woman isn't the one who've succeeded in everything. She's someone who stopped postponing herself for later, who once understood, it's not love if you mentally return to it 100 times, counting others' actions. It's not friendship if it tires you more than loneliness. It's not care if it demands waiting by the door until it's convenient for the other. She stops living in pause mode, no longer hangs on the messages, doesn't check the online status, doesn't build her life on someone else's schedule, because the one who is always waiting eternally stands on the threshold and never enters her own home. Now she makes choices herself, not out of fear of being alone, but out of self-respect. She stops postponing joy, starts saying yes to what she wants, and no to what exhausts her. She no longer waits for someone to confirm her significance. She knows it. A woman who refuses to wait doesn't become indifferent. She becomes free. Her heart still knows how to love, but it no longer allows love to control her. She doesn't chase attention because she has learned to be attentive to herself. Such a woman no longer clings because she understands if something is meant to come, it will find a way. And if it doesn't, then it wasn't meant for her. Life is too short to waste it on waiting for trains that no one promised would come. The world is used to women who fight for attention, for relationships, for someone's loyalty. But true inner strength starts with realizing love isn't a war. It's not a trophy, not a competition, not an achievement. True love is a meeting between two people who don't need to pretend. A woman who grew up in waiting and pain often doesn't notice how she turns love into proof of her own necessity, how she starts competing, comparing, earning. But a moment comes when everything changes. She suddenly understands she doesn't have to explain to anyone why she's worthy to be by their side. Because worthiness isn't an argument, it's a state. From that moment on, she no longer fights, no longer explains her value, doesn't compete with other women, because the woman who knows her worth doesn't enter races. Her presence speaks for itself, and she chooses to be where she is chosen without requests, without fights. She stops exchanging herself for relationships where she constantly needs to prove, because where there's love, there should be no battle for attention. There should be no fear of saying what's uncomfortable. There should be no constant tension in the heart. A woman who has stopped fighting for love chooses something else. Respect, calmness, honesty. She knows how to leave, not because she doesn't love, but because she no longer wants to exchange her soul for the crumbs of someone else's attachment. She hasn't hardened. She's simply learned to distinguish where the real is and where the illusion is, and understood the main thing. True love doesn't need to be conquered. It's enough to be yourself for it to find the way. Sometimes, internal exhaustion doesn't come from deeds, but from attempts to explain when again and again you come into a relationship with an open heart only to receive indifference, misunderstanding, or accusations in return. And each time you're drawn to explain, I'm hurting, you hurt me, I care. But one day comes when a woman no longer justifies herself, not because she stopped feeling, but because she felt too much. She begins to understand. Those who want will understand. Those who love will hear. The rest will simply not wish to listen, and it's not her fault. Exhaustion from constant explanations isn't weakness, it's a signal. A signal that it's enough to explain her pain to those who don't want to see it. It's enough to be a translator from the language of emotions to the language of logic for those who can only listen to themselves. When a woman stops justifying herself, she seemingly returns to herself, stops searching for reasons within herself. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's my fault. No, she no longer tells herself maybe, because she no longer doubts what she feels. How exactly in this moment, serenity is born. Serenity where there's no shouting, no desire to prove, only confidence. Confidence that explaining is a choice, not an obligation. That relationships where you're not heard aren't worthy of your words. And then a woman starts communicating differently. Not with voice, but with actions. Not with requests, but with distance. She doesn't scandalize, doesn't accuse, doesn't revenge. Just steps aside silently because she understands silence isn't weakness. It's a response. The most honest, the most mature, and the strongest one. She doesn't stop loving, but she starts loving herself a bit more. Enough not to justify her pain. Enough not to be ashamed of her vulnerability. Enough not to explain her value. The choice of herself isn't a loud statement. It's a quiet but powerful decision. A decision that comes after many times when you gave too much, when you adapted, saved, endured, until one day you understood. No one will save you but yourself. A woman who chooses herself isn't someone who no longer loves. She's someone who stopped betraying herself for others' comfort. She's not angrier or colder. She's more honest. Honest enough not to be where she's not valued, not to wait for someone to change, not to hope someone will notice her pain if she just endures a bit more. She no longer chases those who leave, doesn't run after those who are silent, doesn't search for the reason for others' indifference, because she's stopped explaining to herself why she is ignored. She's more interested in the question, why did I allow this? She removes from her life those who make her doubt her worth, doesn't revenge, doesn't accuse, just steps out of the game where the rules weren't written by her, and every such step is a return to oneself, who and what she was before she learned to be too convenient. Now she lives from the inner center, listens not to others' words, but to her own feeling, and builds relationships not for salvation, but for reciprocity. She doesn't need, she chooses. She doesn't wait, she goes. She doesn't break, she changes direction. And in this choice lies all her strength, because a woman's strength begins with one decision: to be herself, even if it's inconvenient, not for everyone, but genuinely for herself.